Today we're going to make a little 5-minute instruction on how to do a top end on a 2008 CRF150r. What you want to do first is remove the 12mm oil drain bolt under the bike and drain the oil. Then you got to drain the transmission oil by removing the bolt under the shift lever. Once the fluid is drained, go ahead and put them bolts back. With an 8mm, take the bottom bolt off your water pump housing and drain the coolant. Now you got to take the seat and the gas tank off. The seat is two 10mm bolts right here and right here. With an 8mm, remove the two bottom bolts and the plastics that bolt to the radiator. There's a bolt on each side that you got to go through the plastics to get to because they're on the frame, so make sure you get those. Make sure your petcocks off and remove your fuel line. Take that rubber strap off. The tank and plastics come off in one piece. The coolant system is removed by breaking loose these 5 hose clamps and unbolting the radiators and getting them out of the way. The exhaust is just two 10mm nuts on that flange and then the one under the seat, and then she'll just wiggle out of there. With a Phillips head screwdriver, loosen the hose clamps on the front and the back of the carburetor. Unscrew and remove the hot start plunger. Pull the carburetor out and lay it off to the side. Pop the spark plug cap, remove the spark plug. Take out the two 10mm bolts on the valve cover. Cam chain tensioner is held on by 3 8mm bolts. I loosened the top one and then I removed the 2 bottom ones. With everything removed, it's time to remove the valve cover. I tried to remove the cover for the camshaft for the timing marks, but it was stripped out. So I stuck an Allen wrench in the spark plug hole and turned the camshaft until I got top dead center. The word out on the sprocket was on the exhaust side of the head. The mark on the sprocket lined up with the mark on the camshaft holder. That's top dead center. We're good to go. Remove the cam chain tensioner. A number 6 on a 1/4 inch impact to pop the 2 bolts on the sprocket off. Remove the sprocket and tie a piece of wire around the chain so it don't fall down in the engine. Remove the 4 10mm bolts of the camshaft holder in a crisscross pattern. Before we go any further, this is the shim under bucket valve system. Within that camshaft holder are these buckets. Under those buckets are those little round shims. As you're pulling the holder up, be very careful that the buckets and the shims don't fall out or they will wreak havoc on your life. Once you're good with that, remove the camshaft holder. Verify your shims and buckets are in place. Remove the 4 12mm nuts and washers from the head. There's 2 8mm bolts right there by the cam chain. Pull the head up just a little bit, pull the chain through, and the head will come right out of there. It's been 2 years since I've seen that piston. There's another 8mm bolt right there, and the cylinder will lift right out. The cylinder was in great shape. There was no up and down scoring, and the cross hatches were perfect. It's very important to plug any hole that you open up in the engine with a rag because you will drop a bolt down in it. When you do that, you got to take the cover off the sprocket, remove your gear shifter, take all these bolts out that hold this cover on. Got to remove the oil filler cap to get that bolt, that bolt, that bolt. Take that bracket off. Pop the cover loose and get the bolt that I dropped. Now we're going to put all the perimeter bolts back in the cover. And since we're here, we're going to go ahead and pull the old oil filter out. Making sure we got the spring in there, we're going to put the new filter in. Getting back to it, we got to pop out the little wrist pin clip. Did I really just drop that clip down in the engine? Let me try to get it with my mag. Nope, let's get the cover back off. Stupid clip. Back to the engine. Slide the wrist pin out and the piston will pull right out of there. Really, that's not a bad looking piston for 2 years of service. We have our OEM top end kit ready to go, so let's get after it. I like to get a little oil on my finger and lube up the piston real good. Then install the oil seal, which are the 2 little thin rings and then that crinkle ring. The thick ring is your piston ring. You need to look real close at that piston ring and find that digit stamped in right there. That stamp is on the top side of the ring when you install it. Make sure the rings are installed properly. Also making sure that the gaps in the rings aren't lined up with each other. Now you got to get a wrist pin clip in. There's ways to do it, but I just wrestled around with picks and pliers until I finally got it in there. Before you start going back together with it, make sure you clean all the old gasket material off. Fresh mirror oil, and I installed the new piston. Make sure the word in is on the intake side. Kit comes with a white gasket and a black gasket. White gasket goes on bottom, the black gasket goes on top. The black dots on the white gasket go up. Give the piston a little rub down of oil and carefully insert it into the cylinder. Pull your cam chain up through and get your black gasket on. Now slide the head into place. Apply oil to the washer and head nut and torque them in a crisscross pattern. We stretched them in till about 20 foot-pounds. Put the cam sprocket and chain back on, making sure that all the markings are lined up and the out is on the exhaust side. Torque the 4 camshaft holder bolts in a crisscross pattern to 10 foot-pounds. They make a special tool for the cam chain tensioner, but if you screw in it with a screwdriver, it retracts the shaft. So I just screw in while installing and hold pressure until I can get bolts started. Then with the fresh washer, I'll install the top bolt. Cam sprocket bolts get a drop of thread locker and torque to 15 foot-pounds. I probably should have found a different way to do that. Make sure your counterweight spring is good and install that bolt to 7 foot-pounds. Make sure your counterweight is installed correctly and free moving, because if not, you will throw your hip out trying to crank this bike. Torque that bolt, and that bolt, and put your valve cover back on. Torque those 2 bolts to 10 foot-pounds, put the spark plug back in, put the carburetor back in, screw the hot start back in, and tighten down all the hose clamps. Use a new copper O-ring for the exhaust and torque those nuts down to 10 foot-pounds. Don't forget the one under the seat. Bolt the radiator back to the frame and then configure all the hose clamps back in order. Install the tank, put the rubber strap back, and hook the fuel line back up. Get the 2 bolts for the radiator and the 2 that go to the frame. Now there's just 2 seat bolts. Fill it with coolant, fill it with oil, transmission fluid. Turn the petcock on. Pump the gas about 4 times. Give it a kick. Congratulations, your top end is complete.